Tensions in the Horn of Africa have escalated after landlocked Ethiopia signed an agreement with Somalia's breakaway region, Somaliland, which will give it access to the sea. Mogadishu has blasted the agreement as illegitimate and has appealed for international support. Egypt, which has its own long-running dispute with Ethiopia over the Nile River, said it won't hesitate to act in support of Mogadishu. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi had a tough warning for Ethiopia. Several countries, including Turkey, the US, and Arab League states, have also condemned the deal. Ethiopia lost access to the Red Sea in the early 1990s after the Eritrean War of Independence. Somaliland, which broke away from Somalia in 1991, has maintained its own government but has failed to gain international recognition. Under the new deal with Ethiopia, Somaliland would lease a 20-kilometer stretch of its coastline around the port of Berbera to Addis Ababa for commercial and military purposes. The Gulf of Aden and Red Sea, already plagued by tensions over Houthi attacks from Yemen and retaliatory strikes from the US and UK, could potentially get a lot more volatile. And now to discuss the port deal between Ethiopia and Somaliland, joining me from London is Hannah Ryder. She is the CEO of Development Reimagined, and Michael Amoah. He is a visiting senior fellow at London School of Economics and Political Science. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Hannah, what do you make of the latest deal between Ethiopia and Somaliland, giving Ethiopia access to the Red Sea via the port of Berbera? Did you see that coming?
Well, good question, because I think it was quite a shock to many when this deal was made. And indeed, there had been talk by the president of Ethiopia, Prime Minister of Ethiopia, PM Abiy Ahmed, around the idea of Ethiopia having more access to the Red Sea, which it currently gets through Djibouti. However, this particular MOU with Somaliland was certainly a big shock, and quite especially a shock to Somalia, who are obviously pretty perturbed by this MOU and development.
So, Michael, Somaliland has reportedly given access to Ethiopia in return for potentially recognizing the breakaway region. Is this viable?
Well, there are issues in theory and in reality. In reality, Somaliland fought a war of independence in 1991 against Somalia and won fair and square. And at the moment, for the past 33 years, has its own government, does elections as a president, prints its own currency, and issued its own passports, acting really as a sovereign state, except for the fact that it's not recognized by the United Nations. Mm-hmm. So it sees itself fit to actually deal with other international partners as it wishes. The key question is Somalia prepared to grant Ethiopia access to a Red Sea port? Mm-hmm. That's the big question, really. If Somalia can do that, perhaps maybe Ethiopia wouldn't want to go to Somaliland. But then we'll have to see what Somalia says about that.
So, Hannah, if Somaliland is recognized, let's say, by Addis Ababa, how will that play out, and what kind of regional implications will have on the Horn of Africa and the vital shipping lanes?
Well, I guess it's not the access to the port that is the biggest issue here. I think what the Somali government have said is that they would be, of course, willing to speak to Ethiopia on what they believe are equal terms, because those are two sovereign recognized countries, not only by the UN, but also by the AU. Somaliland is not recognized by the African Union. If they had that discussion, a kind of mutually respected discussion around access to ports in Somalia, I think they would certainly be open, and they've been clear that they would be open to that. The question is, why necessarily does that have to be done with Somaliland specifically? And of course, Somalia would also, no doubt, have been willing to bring in Somaliland, the local administration, into that discussion if necessary. the question is why Ethiopia felt that they had to go to Somaliland specifically, and in terms of the recognition that's not absolutely necessary for Ethiopia to get more Red Sea access.
So we know that Somalia, Mogadishu actually, Michael, has rejected any mediation efforts with Addis Ababa. So on the other hand, Turkey, which enjoys close economic, diplomatic, and military ties with both Somali and Ethiopia, has harshly reacted to the deal and called for direct negotiations between the two neighbors. How do you think it is going to play out? And what kind of political cards does Ankara have to play to put pressure on both sides, especially Ethiopia?
I think Ankara would have to wait a little while on this because the AU, African Union Peace and Security Council, has already assigned the mediation job to the African Union High Representative to the Horn of Africa, which is former President of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo. So Obasanjo is currently working on the case on behalf of the African Union. So at the moment, it doesn't look like the African Union officially is prepared to actually assign any mediation role to any third party outside of the continent.
So, Hannah, how would Ankara's unwavering support to Mogadishu impact its relations with Ethiopia and its economic and political interests in Eastern Africa moving forward if this issue is unresolved?
Well, I should think for Turkey, of course, has played a number of roles in mediation globally. In different areas, we saw Turkey taking a big role in the Black Sea Grain Initiative, for example, most recently. And so that track record, of course, has some that helps to make the case. If there were a third party to be involved, perhaps it could be Turkey. At the same time, as a fellow colleague mentioned, it is important that this is an African-led process in the first place. We've also had IGAD speaking about how they could. They've also issued a statement as well, reiterating Somalia's sovereignty, and so I think there's considerable efforts to try to find a way through. And as I said, I think this is really a question of how can Ethiopia and Somalia really be brought together to find some way through to deliver on Ethiopia's vision. And I think Ethiopia, of course, has a strong vision for more access to the Red Sea, probably also access that's more cost effective for Ethiopia. That's fair enough. But at the same time, also working with its neighbors in a really constructive way is going to be really important.
So, Michael, is there any room for Somalia and Somaliland to engage in talks over this issue, or do differences run too deep to overcome?
Well, I mean, yes, there is room for that. Within the African Union sort of structure, that can be organized. The key practical questions on the ground would be, I mean, Somalia still wants to claim Somaliland, but in practical terms, will Somaliland ever come back to Somalia? The answer is no. It is currently a de facto independent state, more or less. And so I think this particular instance will be a good opportunity for the international community, particularly the United Nations, to think about perhaps according some recognition to Somaliland as an independent state, because then it will resolve future issues going forward. And I think that this particular deal between Ethiopia and Somaliland has brought out this lingering issue of Somaliland just hanging out there, not being recognized while acting as a state on its own. So I think that we need to look at how the African Union can basically bring all parties together to resolve the issue. And then, of course, the international community can work out or think about preparing to actually accord some recognition to Somaliland as an independent state, and then that will resolve further issues in the future.
But isn't it against Somalia's political integrity, territorial integrity?
Well, in the sense that at the moment, Somalia itself is not in the position to look after Somaliland. I mean, we're talking about Somaliland in the past 33 years being more stable and peaceful than Somalia which has been compared to Afghanistan as a failed state. So in practical terms, really, you cannot see how Somalia can govern Somaliland.
So, Hannah, do you agree? I mean, what kind of an influence does Mogadishu have on Somaliland? Is it fit to, for example, intervene if this deal physically goes through?
Well, the issue of self-determination and territorial integrity has been one that is obviously constantly changing internationally. We've seen even issues like that come up with regards to Russia, Ukraine. And so, this is not just a question of a country declares itself that it wants to be sovereign and therefore, or an area declares itself that it has to be something which is carefully and slowly negotiated over time, not only with one country and even one neighbor, but it's really a case of trying to establish the reasoning over a great period of time. And I think what Somalia certainly was looking forward to, having just, for example, come out of the HIPC process, which has been a very, very long process, the highly indebted poor countries process, was really, we're talking about a country, yes, it has been through a great deal of challenges, a great deal of conflict, but really coming to a point where they're trying to develop and do what they have been wanting to do for citizens for a very, very long time. And it feels like almost like a distraction in a sense. Really, what's important now is for both Ethiopia and Somalia to really come back to the fundamentals. Being together and being stronger together is actually perhaps a better way forward, rather than necessarily working on these territorial integrity issues. Let's try and create growth and development for the entire region, not just one specific area.
So, Michael, a very quick answer. Egypt's foreign minister, Sameh Shoukry, has said Ethiopia has become a source of instability in the region. How would that add to the already tense relations between the two countries? And is the region poised for further instability?
Well, I mean, this particular instance has sort of raised some red herrings, but I think it's also an opportunity for the sub-region to come together to basically look at broader issues of security and regional cooperation. And part of the regional cooperation would be, for example, considering how Somalia itself would be able to grant Ethiopia seaport access. We have to also remember that at the moment, Ethiopia is a major troop contributing country to the African transitional mission in Somalia itself. So basically, Ethiopian army is contributing to propping up the Mogadishu government. Now is not the time for Somalia to want to upset Ethiopia with things such as this. So really, we're talking about a serious sitting down at the table to consider all the pros and cons of this and come to some really mutual beneficial arrangements.
All right, Michael and Hannah, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.